Okay, so and part of the reason for my doing this is this the sampling exam is probably was one of the more time consuming ones. And so I'm not I'm tilting here. I'm still tilting. Um what are you doing? I can tell you the room's not tilting, so it's an old house, but it's not tilting that bad. Okay, the sampling exam is one of the more time-consuming ones, and so I don't want to leave it at the end. In other semesters, I've left it to the end, and I don't know. I didn't like how it seemed like students could use a little more time on it, I guess. The chapter 7 one isn't so bad, but the so what we'll do is we'll finish up the sampling overview. And we should be able to finish this one up. Yeah. Okay. Let's go through. Allowance for sampling risk. And this is straight out of statistics. Your statistics class will have this. And that is, we can't get away from that bell curve, the normal distribution. And what that means, excuse me, what that means is that any sample we take, there's a possibility that it does not represent the population as a whole. If we, just for example, if we audit to the 95% level, okay, we get 95%, so we allow for 5% risk of error in there. Well, what that means is that 1 out of 20 times it's going to be wrong. And that's sampling risk. And there's nothing you can do about it other than changing the sample size or changing how confident you want to be in it. But if you have a sample, there's a chance that it's going to be wrong. So that's the what we're talking about here. So sampling risk is the risk that the sample doesn't match the population as a whole. So who's that? It's a ghost. Okay. So sampling risk, your population doesn't match the population as a whole. And the allowance for sampling risk, something's called the precision. This is how accurate do you want to be? Okay, so we have a sample, and the sample says that our projected value is 100,000. And the standard deviation is 5,000. And again, this is what you'll see in your stats books. And so the standard deviations, what they say is how many standard deviations, oops, don't do that. And this is for exactly the same sample. How sure do you want to be? Now, the more sure that you're going to be, the more sampling risk you're going to have. Given the same sample size. Okay, so coming down here, we have allowance for our sampling risk. We'll say, okay, that if you are to be at the 95% level, you're going to be at plus or minus 10,000. So 95% level, you would say, okay, this could be 90,000. Wait, what's the spacing on that one? Or it could be 110,000, between those two. So you'd be 95% sure that it's between those two. Now, if you want to be more certain, you're going to have to move it up, plus or minus 15,000. So this will be 85,000. So if you're 99% sure, this will be between 85,000 and 115. Okay, so for the same sampling size, a lower sampling risk will have a higher allowance for sampling risk. So this is actually a very important. Just highlighting everything. So for the same sample size, a lower sampling risk, so if you want to be 99% sure, will have a higher allowance for sampling risk. It's going to take in more of that bell curve. So you'd be 99% sure it's between 85,000 and 115. You're 95% sure it's between 90,000 and 110,000. Okay. All right, so that's the idea behind behind a sampling, and that this kind of assurance that you want, the allowance and the sampling risk. Okay, now you say, well, what can you do to lessen your sampling risk? A larger sample, you get a bigger sample. If you have that bell curve, you get a bigger sample, you're going to get more accurate, and the bell curve will kind of scooch in, and so then your variances will be smaller, until they keep getting in until you get 100%, and then you're absolutely sure that it's one number. But taking a bigger sample, you can reduce the sampling risk and the allowance for sampling risk. Okay, how do we use this for attribute sampling? Test the controls. All right, test the controls. These are yes/no tests, pretty much. So let's take a control here. A manager, for example, a client may have a control that requires 2 manager signatures on checks written over $5,000. Okay, so why would that be a control? Why do you want to have 2 managers sign off on a check if it's over 5,000? How is that a control? Why can't just one manager sign off on it? Are you guys sleeping already? We're 12 minutes into the class. Anyone? Why do you want to have 2 managers sign off on it? Anyone? You put it in chat if you want. I can tell you that companies I worked at that they did have controls like this. They had one that was ridiculous that I'll tell you about in a few minutes. We got to answer this one though. Why would he have two people sign off on a check for more than $5,000?
Because it's a big amount and they don't want nobody to steal, I guess.
Yeah, that again, like you said, it's a large amount, and they want someone else to take a look at it to see whether this is really on the up and up. And one of the ways to do it is to have someone else sign, have two people sign on a check like that. Hopefully, the controls are there that they can't write a check without two signatures. That doesn't always happen, and we'll find out in this case it doesn't. But excuse me. Anyway, so yeah, having two people look at it and notice that that's a control that makes sure that nothing inappropriate is large as a purchase. But it also may prevent people from even trying to steal the money, right? If I was just able to sign off on it myself, I would, I got bills to pay, I got, whatever, I need the money for whatever reason. I might be tempted to do it. However, if there is someone else has to sign off on it, that might stop me right there before it even starts. So yeah, a second set of eyes look at it, and usually, again, it not only is it preventative in the general sense that more people, one person looking at it, but it may stop people from even trying in the first place, which is, oh, my screen, I didn't lose my screen. Okay. Okay, so the sample of checks written for more than 5,000, determine where they had two manager signatures. So we're gonna take a sample of checks and say, okay, if it's for more than 5,000, it needs to have two signatures. So determine that the checks have two manager signatures. So that'll be like a yes. Do they have two manager signatures on it? Or is there just one? And that would be a no. So it's a yes or no, kind of like flipping a coin. Okay, the auditor allows for an error rate of 7%. For whatever the assessed level of control risk. Okay, let me fill this in a little bit. So for example, let's say it's 7%, maybe they want to be 95%, sure, whatever the assessed level of control risk is, if they want to say, okay, we'll allow for 5% of it, whatever, to not match up, that we want an error rate of allow for an error rate of up to 7%. Now, it doesn't have to be 7%, but up to 11%. And at that level, we say, okay, or they've determined that the allowance for sampling risk, so the amount that it can be off by, is 3%. And by the way, this is the way they oftentimes will show this on the CPA exam. So they'll give you the allowance for sampling risk. So this is kind of like if we were doing up here for the 95% level, it'd be plus or minus 10,000. That's the allowance. So they'll actually give you that number. They don't, they're probably not going to give you the standard deviations or anything like that. But what they'll do is they'll say, okay, here's your allowance for sampling risk. For this one at 95%, it's 10,000. For this one down here, so for 7%, or excuse me, for the 95%, the allowance for sampling risk is 3%. Okay, so we go and we take our test. So here's these checks we get. We wrote 200 checks. Sketch it. This is a sample of 200 checks. There may have been more written. We get the checks back, and checks with two signatures, 196, and checks with only one signature are 4. So what is the error rate in our sample? So we had 200 checks and 4 of them didn't have 2 signatures like they were supposed to.
Is that like 2%?
Yeah, it is. Yep. Yeah, so these are the errors. And yeah, so we'll take the 4 divided by the 200 from our sample. And you're right, that's 2%, 0.02. I'll clean this up in a second. Okay, so let's move this. Okay, so, whoa, that's the wrong. Oopsie daisy. Got a little carried away with the zeros there. Okay, so we had 4 errors out of the 200 checks. So, 0.02 or 2% of them would have been in error. Now, so our best guess, our best estimate is that 2% of these are in error. However, we also have this allowance for sampling risk, this kind of bell curve thing up here, right? We have this allowance for sampling risk that it could be worse than that. So what we have to do is add our error rate to our allowance. Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong spot. Hold on. Okay, so our error rate is 2% plus our allowance for sampling risk is 3%. And so this will equal our upper limit of, oops, that is not a number, is it? 5%. Okay, so our upper limit is 5%. The auditors will be okay. They will allow for an error rate of 7%. I'm going to goof up this handout, but oops. This is kind of confusing the way I got it. Let me change this a little bit. So our upper limit is 5%. This is based on our sample. So we take our sample, we say, okay, this could be off by as much as 5%. Now we'll be happy with an error rate of up to 7%. So will they rely on the control risk?
Yes, because it's smaller than the error rate of 7.
Yep, very, very good. Yep, that is less than, we're saying that worst case scenario, upper limit, it's 5%, but we'll accept up to 7%. So it's less than our what we'll allow for. I hate that we use the word allows and allowance are too closely. This is a statistics term, and this is maybe a better way would be for a tolerable. Audra has a tolerable error rate. I'll change that. I think I pulled this right off of a CPA question. Okay, so now here is the kind of what, this is sort of like a table that'll show what are the possibilities of a sample. And, excuse me. So these are the auditor's assessment of the internal controls. I'm going to bold these. Okay, I don't know what I'm doing here. All right, so these are the auditors, and we'll make those like green. Now over here, hold this whole thing. These are the actual, oops. Results. These, if we had a crystal ball and we could see exactly what the actual amounts are, this is what we come up with. So let's take the easy ones first. So suppose we assess internal control as being adequate, and actually they are adequate. So this would be the correct assumption here. We thought they were adequate, and they are, so we can rely on the controls, and there's nothing wrong with that. We thought they were adequate, and they actually are. Or we get to the next one, we say, okay, we think the controls are inadequate, and they are inadequate. The actual isn't there. So this will also come up with the correct. Let's make those. Oops. Okay. So we have two of these that don't match, and let's go through these. So inadequate, we think they're inadequate when they're actually adequate. Okay, so we do a test of controls. We say, okay, we can't rely on these tests, but maybe our sample just wasn't, like say if we're auditing at the 95% level, that means 5% of the time we're going to be wrong. 1 out of 20 times we do this, we're going to be wrong, and there's nothing you can do about that. Well, I shouldn't say there's nothing. You can actually take a bigger sample, and larger sample, you get more sure, and hopefully that will, tell you whether it's wrong or not. So a lot of times when something fails a sample, it's not the end of the story. You go grab a bigger sample and see if it, see if the larger, more sure sample also says that you can't rely on. But so we say that they're inadequate, and they're actually adequate. So this would mean that we are under relying on the controls. So our assessed control risk is too high. Now, what we're going to do to make up for this, we're going to do more substantive testing. We're going to test more dollar amounts because, okay, we say, okay, we can't rely on these controls. These controls are not reliable. We can't rely on them. Forget about the internal controls. we're going to have to take more dollar samples. So instead of taking 500 items, we need to take 800 items or whatever it is. So if you can't rely on the controls, you go, okay, I got to do something. Now, notice you're actually going to do extra work because the actual controls you could have relied upon. They were adequate. But you didn't know that your sample told you they were inadequate, so you didn't rely on them and you did this extra work. Okay, so this is an inefficient audit. Oops. It's an inefficient audit because we're going to take more than we actually needed to. Now, not because we're stupid or anything like that, but because our sample said you can't rely on these when you actually can. Okay, assess control risk too low. So you think that everything is okay because of your sample, right? You're up here, you go, oh, okay, everything's fine. We got our sample, maybe it's like this up here. Okay, we're at the 5% level. We can rely on these controls. Well, maybe it just happens to be that your sample does not match up with the population as a whole. Maybe the true error rate is 8% or 9% or whatever it is. But your sample that you just happen to pick shows that it's at 2%. So you think everything's okay when it's not. This leads to a ineffective audit. So which one of these is more dangerous? To assess the control risk too low or to assess the control risk too high? Which one's more dangerous for an auditor?
Too low?
Yes, because you should be taking a bigger, you should be doing more testing, right? These are inadequate controls. You should be doing more testing, and but you don't know that. You think everything is okay when it's actually not. You stick to your plan, let's say you plan on taking 500 items for dollar testing, for substantive testing. You take your 500 items, you think, okay, all I need is 500 items, but actually you need a lot more than that because the controls are not effective. So you can't rely on them. You don't know that though. That one is the more dangerous one. The other one is inefficient. Okay, you spend a little extra money, but you're going to come up with the right decision because when you take the dollar amounts, it's going to show that everything's okay. So this one's an inefficient audit. This one's an ineffective audit. You think everything's okay. This is the more dangerous one always, is you think everything's okay, but it's not. Okay. Substantive procedures. We already done these. We did a lot of these. The classical sampling and the monetary unit sampling. You guys remember how much fun those were? And so these are substantive procedures are for dollar amounts. These are how much are are these financial statements materially misstated? So these are what we're going to tell you the material misstatements. By the way, test of controls, they do not tell you the material misstatements. they'll tell you, percentage what the controls, if they're effective or not effective or whatever. But the tested controls are not used for finding material misstatements. They're used to reduce the amount of testing that you do, the substantive testing, so that you're more efficient. But they do not tell you what a material misstatement is. They don't test for dollars. It's error rates. Not only that, even if there is a control that's not working, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong dollar-wise. We had this, the two managers setting off on checks or whatever. Even if that control isn't working as planned, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong. So tested controls are a little bit different than tests of, the substantive testing, in that even if you do find problems with them, that doesn't mean necessarily that the financial statements are misstated. Financial statements might be fine. It's just they have weak internal controls. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. When we talk about testing controls versus substantive testing, testing controls, they will tell you if the controls are working or not. They don't tell you whether the financial statements are materially misstated. And yes, you can have weak terrible internal controls, and your financial statements can be fine. You get a clean audit. Even though the controls aren't working, the financial statements are not misstated. They are, they can be relied upon. They're fairly presented. Okay. All right, so now coming down here, we get the same scenario as we had on the previous page. Oops. What colors did I use up here? Green and blue. Okay. So here's green. So this is the auditors. So the auditors do their testing and they find that they're either not materially misstated or they're materially misstated. Actually, over here, again, same scenario, that they're centered. They are not materially misstated or they're materially misstated. So if they are not materially misstated and actually they're not materially misstated, this is also correct. We came to the correct conclusion on those. And same thing over here. If we say they're materially misstated and they are materially misstated, this is also the correct decision. Now, when we come to these other two, we'll notice that there is a problem. So for instance, suppose we say that they are materially misstated and they're not actually materially misstated. What we'll probably end up doing is more testing. This is again runs into that inefficient one. So if we say that they're materially misstated and they are not, this is usually leads to more testing, more substantive tests. And if they're not materially misstated, this will lead us to our inefficient audit again. So our audit is inefficient. How do I mark it up here? Red. Okay. Now, if they're not materially misstated, if we think they're not materially misstated when they actually are, this means that not enough substantive testing. And this leads to an ineffective audit, and this is the one you want. This is the one it scares you. Oops. Left off a couple of letters here. And that makes for an ineffective audit. Because you're going to think everything is okay. Hey, we don't have to do any more testing. Look, everything came out fine. But what really might be happening is you're testing at 95% level. You're at that 5% that says everything is okay when it's not. Okay, so this one we talk about this being over reliance on internal controls, and this one the same thing. We would be kind of fooled into thinking that the financial statements are not materially misstated. That's what our test told us, when they actually are, and then more testing would be needed to find that material misstatement. Okay, any questions on that? So these are kind of the risks that you have for testing for auditing specifically. And again, the ones that you worry the most about are the times that you think everything is fine and it's not, because that's going to lead to an ineffective audit. You're not going to do enough testing when you need to. The test will come out, and you'll think you're 95% sure it's right. Well, 1 out of 20 tests are not going to be right. And there's really nothing you can do to get out of that. And that's one of the difficult things about auditing. Now, for internal controls, again, just because the controls don't, maybe you're relying on the controls too much, doesn't necessarily mean the financial statements are misstated. But down here, this is the real problem. If they are materially misstated and you don't know that, that's a problem, because these material misstatements will probably end up showing up on the financial statements. Ooh, excuse me, I'm boring myself. I guess it goes around, it comes around. Okay, relationship between substantive tests, testing controls and substantive tests. So there's a relationship between those two. Suppose the initial test of controls indicate that the controls cannot be relied upon. What should the auditor do? So let's say you're testing internal controls and they're a mess. You can't rely on them. Okay, are you going to do more test of controls, or are you going to do more substantive testing? So you start doing your test of controls, and let's say that you just can't rely on them. And by the way, having done auditing, I can tell you that for most things, it's kind of like all or nothing. If everything's working fine, you'll go through, you pick a sample of 80 items or something, and you go through it. And by the time you get to item number 40, you can see where it's going. Okay, if all the first 40 were all perfect, you go, okay, this is, chug through the other 40, until you get to the end of it. But you kind of know where it's going, it's really before you get halfway through. Or if they're bad, you go through the first 10 items and 7 of them are messed up. You go, okay, you know what? This isn't working. So a lot of times it is either hit or miss on these, and that's just the nature of things either being done correctly or adequately or conscientiously or whatever, and those things not being done that way. So what do? You start doing some tests. You do the initial test of internal to indicate that the controls cannot be relied upon. Are you going to increase the test controls or increase the substantive testing, the dollar testing?
B.
Yep, very good. Yeah, if you can't rely on the controls, there's no reason to keep going. If you can't rely on the controls, you want to rely on the controls so you can reduce your substantive testing. If you can't rely on them, at that point you just stop. And you say, okay, you know what? I can't rely on these controls, so what I'm going to do is increase the substantive features. So maybe instead of instead of 500 items, put this down below. Now take a sample of, I'm just making this up. Yeah, so, if you can't rely on the controls, let's say that if you could rely on the controls, you'd take 500 items, but you can't rely on the controls. So you got to increase that sample size just to some other number. I'm just making that number up. But so you're going to increase the substantive procedures. So the relationship. Oh, I didn't talk about what the relationship is. I'll do it up here. I'll make it in big, obnoxious capital letters. They have an inverse relationship. So the relationship between tested controls and substantive tests is inverse. If you do less of these, you do more of these. If you do tested controls, if you can rely on the controls, you do more tested controls and less of the substantive testing. So it's inverse. And by the way, it is possible as an auditor that you don't do any tested controls. If you're not going to rely on the controls at all, you might not take any of them. And then it's really inverse. It's zero versus, completely. By the way, and you might not do the test controls for a couple of reasons. One might be that it won't reduce your substantive testing very much, and it'll cost more to do the test controls than the substantive testing. It could be that small businesses, a lot of times they don't have internal controls. You know how we have to separate people out, the segregation of duty thing. Well, let's say you have two people that work in your office that run the place. They do the accounting, they run the bills, they pay the bills, they do the banking. You only have two people. You need at least three people to split up any kind of duties. But if you only have two people in the office, it's impossible. So it is possible they don't have any internal controls, and then you're going to focus completely on the substantive testing. So tested controls are not required unless you're going to rely on them. If you're going to rely on the internal controls, you have to test them. If you're not going to rely on the internal controls, you don't need to test them. Okay, let's see here. What are we at? 649. I tell you what, let's jump right into the practice exam, sampling practice exam. This is all we're going to do tonight, by the way. We're just going to do this the sampling practice exam, and I'm going to send out the sampling exam, which is kind of like, I would say it's tied with chapter 3 as being the two worst tests, or the hardest tests, I should say. It's not worse. It's good stuff. It's on the CPA exam, but it's just, there's a lot to them. Okay, so let's go to our practice exam, and we'll do some of these, and then we'll take a break. We'll do the first one, then we'll take a break, and then we'll do the other stuff. Okay, test the controls. This is what we just did. ABC Corporation requires department manager. Oh, that a department manager signs all purchase orders. Okay, so a department manager has to sign the purchase order. That's a control. They don't want the purchasing department just buying things. Any purchase order needs to have a signature. The auditor allows for an error rate of Okay. The auditor allows for an error rate of 6%. So we're okay up to 6% of these not being right. The allowance for sampling risk is 3%. So that's going to be on top of whatever our actual error rate is. Okay, so 300 items, and here is our, oops. Here's our oops. No. This is what we get. So out of the 300 purchase orders, 15 of them did not have a manager's signature. So what's the error rate?
5.26%.
I think it's just 5. It's out of the 300. Hold on. Oh, I goofed up my spacing again. I don't know why I do this. But
It's 5%, I think.
wait 1 second.
I
Yeah,
did it with the 285. Was it not the 300 purchase?
okay, yeah. So you're gonna do the 300. So let's say that. Why don't I do that in something? What do I call it? I want to be consistent. Oops, not there. Okay, errors. Okay. So we have errors. We're 15 of the 300 in the total sample equals, oops, 0.05 or 5%. Okay, so our actual error rate is 5%, and this would be our best estimate as far as what the actual error rate is. Okay, now, can we rely on the controls? We have an error rate.
No,
Good. Yep, we cannot rely on them. Our error rate is 5%. Our allowance is, and this is for sampling risk. Under the bell, we add 5, or not 5 more, 3 more to it. And so this will give us our upper limit of 8%. So according to our sample, this could be off by as much as 8%. Our best estimate is it's off by 5, but the upper limit that we have to use, because this is a sample, is 8%. Oops. And you're absolutely right. We cannot rely on it. We can't rely on it because we're saying everything is okay for up to 5%, or no, 6%. I'm going to change these to a different. I think I have this one as the. So our error rate is 5%, our allowance is 3%. So the upper limit, according to our sample, this could be up by as much as 8%. The auditor allows for an error rate of 6%. So can they rely on it? No. Because the upper limit is more than the, let me write that in. No. The upper limit, 8%, is higher The allowable 6%. So it's worse than we can allow for. So if the upper limit's higher, we can't rely on it. If it's lower, we can. If it's lower or the same, I should say, we can. Okay, so this is for the purchasing department. What was the misstatement of the purchases? Well, unknown. They might be misstated, they might not be. List of controls do not indicate misstatements. Only substantive tests. This would be like classical sampling. Okay, let me clean this up a little bit. Okay, so it's we need a T there. Okay, it's unknown. Test controls do not indicate misstatements. Just because a purchase order isn't signed by the department manager doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong. It is a control that they'd like to have, but it's possible that nothing, even though the control is not working. So only substantive tests, classical sampling, monetary unit, can identify misstatements, dollar amounts. Okay. How would the results of this impact the planned substantive tests of 500 items? So we planned on, if we can rely on the controls. So we're doing test of controls because hopefully we can rely on them. We can't. So we had planned that we were going to have a substantive test of 500 items. So what's going to happen to those 500 items? Are we going to take 500 items or more or less items for substantive testing? So, for instance, classical sampling, mean per unit. Let's say we're going to do mean per unit testing of 500 items. We can't rely on the controls. So are we going to take more of those or less? So we were hoping to rely on the controls. That's the whole reason why we did the test of controls. We thought we could rely on them. We go through the testing, we find out we can't rely on them. So we go to the dollar amounts, or whatever we're using. I think it's a mean per unit. So suppose we're going to use mean per unit for doing our dollar testing. Are we going to need more or less than the 500?
We're gonna need more.
Yep, very good. So since the auditors, oops. You're not relying on the internal controls. A larger items AG, I'm just making this number up, but maybe you have to pick 900 items. Oops, that's not 900. You have to make up for the fact that you cannot rely on those internal controls. You were hoping to, that's why you did the test of controls in the first place. But since they can't rely on them, they need to take a larger sample. Now, if they could rely on the internal controls, so for instance, let's say that this came out, the upper limit came out to say 5% or 4% or whatever, and they could rely on the controls, they could keep the 500. Another thing is if the test controls were really good, let's say they do a test of controls and it's down to 2% or 3% or something like that, and they allow for 6%, it's possible they could even reduce these. So if the controls are really good, you can reduce the substantive testing. If the controls are as planned, you just keep the substantive testing the same as you did when you made your plan out. If the test cannot be, if the test of controls show that you cannot rely on the controls. And by the way, you did the test of controls thinking you could rely on them. That's why you spent the time and effort to do it. If you didn't think you could really be able to rely on the controls, you wouldn't do the testing in the first place. You're not going to waste time doing tests on something you don't think you can rely on. But so you do test controls thinking you can rely on them, and that will help reduce your substantive testing. If you find out that that's not the case, I can't rely on these controls, then you go to plan B. Plan B is, okay, we got to take more substantive testing. And maybe you'll learn from that. And, the next year when you come in, you don't do the test controls. Are the controls the same? Yeah. Okay, well, we're not going to test those. We'll just take we'll skip wasting the time doing that and just focus on taking a larger substance test sample. Okay. Is this test required by the ASCPA? It depends. Test of controls are only required when the auditor is relying the controls to reduce, testing. So is it required? It depends on whether you're relying on those internal controls or not. If you're not going to rely on the internal controls, you don't have to do any of the testing. So are they required? Not necessarily. If you're going to rely on the internal controls, then they are. But if you're not, You don't need to. Okay, let's stop here. We'll come back. We'll say be back at 7:13. I'll leave this up. Okay. Okay, classical sampling. We probably don't need to do, but well, actually, the classical sampling difference estimation is the one that people, if people trip up on them, that's usually the one they trip up on. Okay, so classical sampling, we need to get the average audit value. Oops. And the average book value. By the way, on the CPA exam, oftentimes these are given in multiple choice form. Ah, that's not what I want. And the book value is, our average book value is $48. Okay, mean per unit. Now, you should probably start to get to know these just by the names of these actually pretty much give away what they are, how to do them. Mean per unit, mean is just the average. And which average do we take? The average audit or the average book? Which one is more reliable, more persuasive? The one that we did or the one that someone handed to us?
Audit.
The audit.
Yep, good. So we'll take the audit mean, is the average of $50. And we're gonna say, okay, everything in the total population should be valued at $50. So all 8,000 of these accounts receivable should be $50. Oops, where am I? Lost myself. Okay, so 8,000 equals some number. Okay, so this is 400,000. So this will be the projected value. And the total, so the book value is 380,000. Okay. I can't remember how I did this in the other ones. I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna cheat because I don't want to put it on here differently than I had in the other ones. Book value, projected value. Okay. So the book value is 380,000. The projected value, oops. The projected value was 400,000. Okay, so the projected misstatement is, wait a minute, I gotta look at this again. I did this differently, but I didn't. Okay. So the projected misstatement is what, 20,000? Oops. Yeah. Oh, okay, so projected misstatement is 20,000. Now, is this an understatement or an overstatement? Are we saying that their books are too high or too low?
It's an understatement.
Yep, good. So this is our projected, so this will be an understatement. Yeah, we're saying it's 400,000, they're saying it's only 380, so the projected misstatement would be understated. Okay. Ratio estimation, which is probably my favorite, not that I should have favorites, but there you go. So this is the audit average or audit mean. Oops. And we will divide that by the book average. uh, Times the book value. So times the 380,000. Yeah. And this will equal our projected value. $395,833. Is what you guys saying? Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. Oh, it looks funny. I thought it'd be a nice round number. Obviously, it's not. Okay, so this is our projected value. So our projected value is oops. 833, so we project a misstatement of about 15,000. 833. Is that right? I think that's right. So this will be our projected misstatement. Is that an overstatement or an understatement? We're saying it should be 395,000.
Overstatement.
It's just gonna be an understatement.
I mean, I'm sorry, looking at the wrong thing.
Yeah, no, but yeah, so we're saying they should be higher than what they have. So wait, what did I just say? It's understatement. Yeah, it's an understatement. Yeah. Think about it. Yeah, so it's understated by 15,000, according to what we came up with. And difference estimation is probably the one that people miss the most on this. Just because it's wacky and you get the misstatement first. You got to kind of back into the. Okay, so I'm going to cheat again and look and see how I presented this one. Okay. So the audit value. There's an average audit average. I apologize. I've been in meetings all day long. My brain is just completely dead. Even more so than usual. Our book average is 48. And so this is our difference is $2. And is that an overstatement or understatement? We're saying that everything should be 50. They have everything at 48. So just on our averages here, is this going to be an overstatement or understatement? We're saying they should be 50. They're saying they're 48.
It's understated.
Yep. So everything is understated by $2. So we're going to say, okay, everything in the sample. And this difference estimation is when everything is off by the same amount. 8,000. So we're saying that all 8,000 items in the total population are off by $2. So what is that? 16,000. This is the projected misstatement. Now, and again, this is kind of the wacky one in that we get the misstatement first. What did I do? Give me I didn't mean to do all these. Hold on, one more time. Okay, so 16,000. All right, and these are all understated. Okay, so what would our projected value be? We're saying everything, it's understated by 16,000. So what would our projected value be? Anyone?
Would it be 364,000?
Actually, go the other way. We're saying it's understated by that, so we have to add this to
Or
it.
add it? Oh,
No, so you know, actually, I'm going to give you a formula. I should have given you before. So the projected value equals the book value plus any understatements or minus any overstatements. And it's going to be one or the other. Okay, so the book value is 380,000. Plus any understatements, and in this case, we do have an understatement of 16,000. And now, if it's understated, it's not going to be, you know, it's going to be one or the other. You can't have both of these. It's either going to be understated. Actually, I should say understated. Ah, so we're saying it's understated by 16,000, so we'll add it to it. So this would be, what is, I didn't say it, 396. And again, oh, it's not that I'm tired. It's like I've just been listening to this crazy stuff all day long. So it's gonna be one of these. If it's understated, you're gonna add it. If it's overstated, you're gonna subtract it. And that is still wrong. Hold on. 396. Okay. All right. So our projected value for this would be 396, and it's understated. You know, they only have 380 on the books. They should have 396. They've understated it by 16,000. And by the way, you know, this is what, you know, when you get these on the CPA exam nowadays, anyways, a lot of times they'll be in multiple choice questions, and that they'll say, you know, using difference estimation, is this, you know, what's the overstatement or understatement? Or something, you know, something along those lines. They could give you a problem. I don't think they do that as much anymore. You know, when I was going through, they used to give us big problems like this, you know, they would say, okay, figure out what are these three, what are the three, you know, projected values for these or whatever. Okay. Sample size. People usually do pretty well on this one. So this is for monetary unit sampling. This used to be tested more than it is now. Now it's tested less. You still see it on the CPA exam, but not as much as you. When I was going through, they talked about it like it was the greatest thing ever. Um, it's good for overstatements. That's it. Okay, these government information find sample size. Okay, sample size. Oh, all right, we gotta come down here. Okay, so we have our total book value is 500,000. Our tolerable misstatement is 30,000. So we're okay with this being off at the 30,000. Maybe these numbers look small. I mean, they look like they're, and our expected misstatement is 1,200. And now we need to go grab some factors. We need the reliability factor at 0, and we need the expansion factor. And we also need to know what the risk is, the risk of incorrect acceptance. So this would be that you accept the, you know, whatever it is that they have, that you make the mistake of believing what they gave you. And just because your sample is, doesn't represent the sample as a whole. Okay, so let's get the reliability factor first. So at 0, at 10%, $231. Yeah, I did that wrong. Should be yellow. Our expansion factor at 10%. The nice thing about the expansion factor is doesn't matter what row you use, there's only one. 1.5. I gave more rows for doing this. All right, well, let's take a look here. So that, what should I do? I'll do it up here, I guess. Yeah, I'll do it below. Okay, so we're gonna I'm gonna do it up here. So our sample size, so we have 500,000 times 2.31. So what is that? divided by 30,000 minus 1,200 times 1.5. Well, 100 times 1.5. Should be like 1,800. I should do it in my head. So 30,000 minus 1.5 times 1,200 is 1,800. $1,155,000 divided by 30,000 minus 1,800 is 28,200. Uh, 40.98. And we can't take 0.98, so we're gonna round off the nearest number. So this will be rounded to oops. So we're gonna take 41 items. All right, coming down here, total book value is 500,000 divided by 41. What is that equal? I'm gonna run off the nearest dollar, $12,185. So okay, so take 41 items, every 12,195. So the first one would be 12,195. The second one would be what, 24,390? Something like that. And you just keep going every 12,000. And that's gonna, this is what you're gonna use to pick your sample. You know, every $12,185 worth. Okay. Now for the horrible, terrible, ugly one. All right, so let's go through here. The first one, actually, more people missed this first one than I think. This one and the interval one are the one people miss the most. I hope that no one misses it at all. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. First one, right out of the box, this first one is a no-go. Why? This is an understatement. We're saying it should be 300. They're saying it's 250. This is an understatement. Oops. This one is not misstated at all. And we can say this one is not going to be in the incremental allowance because it's not misstated. It's perfect. And yes, that does bug me as an auditor. The second one here is well behaved. Thank you, second one. 40 divided by 200 times 500. So this is kind of like ratio estimation, but for each interval, we take one item, ratio estimation for each interval. Okay, so the projected value for this interval is $1,000. No. So the projected misstatement is the rest of it. So 5,000, 1,000 of it is, so was that misstated by 4,000? And this one's well behaved, so this one will be a yes. There still could be more things wrong in this interval. We've only taken $200 worth of the $500 interval. So there's still going to be something wrong. So there, there still could be something more wrong with that interval than what we found. Okay, the third one here. This is one that trips up. It doesn't trip up everybody, but it trips up a lot of people. This is when the book value is greater than the interval. It covers the entire interval. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why we do this method. It's at 4,500, they boosted it up to 5,700. When it crosses that $5,000 interval, it's automatically going to be picked. So we're 100% sure we're going to catch this misstatement. It's more than the interval. Now, when that happens, we go to the actual loss and not the estimated loss. We know exactly what the actual loss is. So we'll take the 5,700 minus 4,500. And this equals our $1,200 yeah. Actual misstatement. And by the way, this is an actual overstatement in case you're keeping track. So this actual overstatement, this is not an estimate. This is the actual amount. Now, because this is the actual amount, it can't get any worse. It covers the entire interval. This would not be included in the incremental. So we only have one thing for the incremental. Now, we're still saying that this is a misstatement. It is a projected misstatement. It goes with the projected ones. This is actually an actual misstatement, but we'll fill it in with the projected misstatement. So these together will add up to, what is that, 5,200? Basic precision equals our sampling interval, 5,000. Times our reliability factor at 0 misstatements. Okay, we need to know the percentage here. So the percentage here is 10%. Okay, so let's go down 10% at 0. $2.31. I don't know why I got these spaced out so. Yeah, so 5,000 times 2.31 equals some number. $11,550. Oops. So that's our basic precision. And you don't need those for the test, but the basic precision is there for if there was absolutely no misstatements, you'd still have this basic precision. So if you didn't have any misstatements, it's still possible this could be off by 11,550 because it's a sample. You don't take everything. Okay, for our reliability factors, we only have one that's on the incremental allowance, so we're only going to use one. We go to our table. Overstatement 1 minus overstatement 0 minus 1 will give us our incremental factor. Okay, so we're here. 3.89 minus 2.31. Where are we at? So this will be our factor. And yes, there should be a table for this. But you'll never see one, so. .58. And this is what we're going to multiply by our our misstatements, the largest ones first, we only have one that we're gonna do this for, that's the 4,000. Let me do this differently. So here's our factor we're gonna use for incremental allowance. We're gonna multiply that by our misstatement. You take the largest one first, we only have one. 2,320. And the incremental allowance is this, that if something is misstated, that means there's a greater likelihood that there's more things that are misstated. And the size of it matters. Something that's misstated by a lot is different than something that's misstated by a little. And we take all three of these. And we make a mess out of our add all these up. And we get some number. $16,190. Is that what you guys got? Alright.
Professor,
Yeah,
I got 19,070.
yeah, I think that's right, because there's no, yeah. It's gotta be more than 16,190 because just the first two are more than that. What I did wrong? 23, aha. 2320 twice, that's not right. Let's try that again. 5,200 plus. Did you say 19,070?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That is right. So this would be our our upper limit on the misstatement. So we would have to decide whether this was, what's the total book value? 400,000. Okay. So is 19,000 material or not? That's a judgment call. But we should all come up with the same answer though, unless you're me. You should all come up with the same answer. And that is that 19, the upper limit on this is it could be off by as much as 19,070. Our best estimate is that it's off by this, 5,200. But basic precision says this is a sample. If there's no errors, it could be off by something. And incremental allowance says, okay, if it is off, the larger the error, the larger the problem. And that's why we multiply it by this incremental allowance. Okay. Wow, it's right at 8 o'clock. Okay. So, any questions on that thing? I'll back up in case you want to take a screenshot of that. Okay, so I will send you guys out the test. It'll be later on tonight, maybe like at 10ish. I want to go over and make sure that I'm not sending out something crazy. But so I'll send you out the exam for the sampling exam. And that is due on Friday the 6th. So we'll still, I know what I didn't want to talk to you guys about. Not Zoom. If you look at the calendar, we're off on the 26th. So next week, we do not have class. Okay, so no class next week. I'm gonna put it up here. Nope. So this is why I kind of rushed through to do the sampling one, because this one probably takes the most time, and just to get it out of the way. So no class next week, but we will have a class before the test is due. The sampling is due on Friday the 26th, so the following week the test is due, and you can ask questions on the 2 weeks from now. So no class next week, Thanksgiving, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. The exam should be, I'll have the exam out to you by 10. Any questions? I see something here. Hey, 4 of you. I'm gonna take a screenshot of that. I'll give you guys extra credit points on the. Let's see. Where is it? Okay. I'll put some extra credit points for you guys on the sampling test. Any questions? All that talking in my minute now made us 3 minutes late. I apologize. Well, I'll give you guys next week off. How about that? All right, so I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, good night.
Thanks, guys.